The conflict situation in the Middle East is fluid. South Africans in Dubai and Bahrain tell of the terror of Iran's retaliatory strikes after Israel and the US took out Iran's supreme leader. The traveller's airspace is chaotic, and Pretoria's allegiance to Tehran will be tested even further. We crossed to global news correspondent and columnist Phillip de Wet to navigate this massive moment marked both abroad and locally.
Whether or not you agree with an Israeli invasion, whether or not you think it should have the right to at least peaceful nuclear development, Iran has proven itself to be the kind of administration that you cannot do business with, that you cannot associate yourself with, yet the ANC is happy to do so.
In our trending topic for today, Somerset West sting cracks an attempted Cape corruption case. And finally, the Cape's got a long history of water scarcity and provision problems, with On This Day in South African History heard later.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
In Roby's Pointless Braai Quiz, here's our question. Former Cope co-founder and leader Masero Lekota has sadly died. How old was he? I'll give you the answer at the end of the show.
You're listening to The Lead on News 24 with your host, broadcast journalist Graeme Robenheimer.
Moving to our top story today, and every time I get a headache about trying to understand the current state of the globe or incessantly concern myself over the impending doom of a possible World War III scenario, well, we turn to our global news correspondent and columnist Phillip de Wet for solace and, of course, reckoning. He's live with me now from the south of England. He's about to train off to London a little later. Phillip, thanks so much for joining us on The Lead. And how's the weather there in the south of England?
Hello, Graeme. That's a very relevant question in Europe right now, because if you've been watching the price of gas, you'll know that Europeans are quite obsessed about the weather in the near future. It's getting a little bit warmer, unlike Ukraine, where it still drops below freezing, and that's kind of relevant. In the south of England, it's not quite that frosty anymore, but parts of Europe are still looking for their last kind of like spring cold snaps. And that's going to be a lot more costly than it was this time last week.
Yeah, thank goodness you're not in the north of England where it's perpetual rain all year long. Okay, I think let's begin by stating that since Israel's strikes, of course, supported by this unprecedented US intel, took out the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and several other senior defense officials, and of course it wasn't just him, the overall situation in the Middle East, as of the latest sort of international news outlets, and I always sort of concern myself with the BBC and Al Jazeera, and of course the syndicated sites like Reuters et al. I mean, the violence has really spiraled into other neighboring countries. It's utter madness right now, and it's a very fluid situation. Who all's been pulled into this now, Phillip?
Well, you can kind of look at the map and then start going through those. So, most notably perhaps are the Gulf states. So we've got Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Oman to a certain extent already involved there. Then, of course, you've got the slightly further afield front between Lebanon and Israel. But then, in between, you've got, for instance, the flight paths that Israeli jets are taking. They have to go either over Jordan, which they typically don't anymore these days, or they have to go through Iraqi airspace, so that gets tricky. And then we've had attempted attacks as far away as Cyprus on a British base from Iran. Now, the moment you're in Cyprus, that's more than halfway across the Mediterranean. Now suddenly You're talking about Europe. And then, of course, we've got UK involved, we've got France involved, and increasingly it looks like there's going to be kind of calls from the Gulf states on the countries that have defense agreements with them and who sell them weapons, because they have to keep up their stocks of air defense supplies. Notably not involved quite yet are the likes of Russia and China, and then I guess even North Korea. But that those phones are ringing, so that might just be a matter of time.
Sure. But those latter countries you just mentioned did take part in some BRICS war games off the coast of Simonstown, but more on that a little later. There are actually no real clear, immediate reasons or justifications in terms of the statements that have been coming out of the White House, as well as from Tel Aviv at this point, as to why Israel has taken this unprecedented action, and the US has obviously supported it with that key intel, because as the reports go, Iran was really taken unawares and by surprise to some degree, but although at the same time was expecting something of this magnitude. No real clear reasons as to why this is happening, Philip?
Legal reasons? No. And I've been playing a little game with myself, trying to watch when Donald Trump starts using language that protects him from future war crimes prosecutions. But neither he nor Benjamin Netanyahu seem to be particularly concerned about that. No, I mean, as international law stands, there was no reason to attack at this time. Israel and the US previously, when they bombed Iran, told us that they had effectively removed the nuclear threat for a goodly while. So it's very hard to come out now and say, well, there was an imminent nuclear threat when you previously said that there wasn't. The argument that, a buildup of ballistic missiles would have protected nuclear development down the road, that's not an imminent threat. No one is going to buy that. And, also interesting politically, it does not seem that Trump has hit the kind of messaging which is convincing to the MAGA base. A lot of the polls at the moment show that more conservative Americans are kind of trusting it for now and saying, well, maybe it was necessary, but let's see what happens. So politically, it really comes down to how long does it take before the US can say that it's pulling back entirely on this war, and that it can stop losing lives, very importantly, and that it can stop expending very expensive munitions.
Yeah, because US soldiers have most certainly, as the official figures indicate, have lost their lives in this conflict, although the Iranian figures on their side in the death toll is around the 700 mark, and those figures are constantly changing. But there are, of course, these underlying reasons, and if we have it in contrast to what happened when we previously spoke over the unprecedented Venezuela saga, the US Trump administration was like, we want regime change there. This time round for Iran, it's like, it's the same sort of statements being made. Hey, we support some sort of moment for the Iranian people to rise up and change things. But as it stands, the Iranian government's already, according to reports, had prepared itself for a new strain of leadership to come on board. Do we know how far along they are at this time?
We don't. It's very hard for us to tell what's happening domestically within Iran, partially because information just does not come out of Iran reliably, partially because the situation is extremely confused. What we haven't seen are real indications of an imminent revolution or an imminent overthrow of the regime. And that is presumably why the American language has softened quite a lot on that. Initially, there was kind of like language around regime change. And, it was kind of implied that this was part of the intent. And then that part of it just went quiet. And then they stopped talking about that. We suspect that's because American intelligence is saying, our best efforts to see suggest that the regime is relatively stable at the moment, that this is not going to be the thing that pushes it over the edge. In fact, we are seeing that kind of more moderate Iranians are perhaps hardening their stance ever so slightly. So we're seeing a lot of people talk about not being governed from abroad or not allowing others to determine their future, that there's a concern especially about Israel, but also about America, kind of taking control of the government either by coercion or by stealth. So it's not impossible, as these things go, that, a couple of months down the line, we're looking at a stronger regime rather than a weakened one.
Yeah, in the meantime, over in Washington, D.C., I mean, there's all these reports, and it's all over the place, and oftentimes very difficult to pinpoint given the various publications as to which side they're skewed. You know how the U.S. situation goes, Philip. Well, on one side, the Democrats are criticizing the process Trump took in bringing these strikes, but can't necessarily condemn the overall strikes themselves. What do we make of this moment over in Washington, D.C.?
Americans have this problem where it's very hard for them to go after a wartime president, which is what they effectively have now. So regardless of your political affiliation, you are supposed to unite behind the flag, especially when soldiers start coming back in body bags. If you then question the war, then you're questioning the sacrifice that those service people have made, and that's the most unpatriotic thing you can do. That'll haunt you for a very long time to come. So the moment the bombs are flying, the rules change in America quite drastically. So I think we're seeing a certain reticence from the Democrats on the basis of that. Also, because everyone is trying to read the tea leaves now, and we just don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen regionally. This could be, the big conflagration that we've been worried about for so long. Or, and we've seen this quite recently, or there could be a suing for peace from the Iranian side. The decapitation of the Iranian leadership made that less likely, perhaps. But again, we're not quite sure what the thinking is within Iran. That can determine the length of the war, and that determines what the American domestic response can be like. And that's what, the big parties there are worried about.
Right. Let's talk things domestically, and we're going to move from the south of England to Cape Town, all the way through up to Pretoria. And the ANC-led foreign policy has been that in the government of national unity. And I think sometimes that's very difficult for South Africans, generally on the whole, to wrap their heads around, that it's really the ANC calling the shots here on how South Africa propels itself on the world stage. And the ANC has consistently, since the late 70s into the early 80s, during the height of the state of emergency in South Africa, the ANC's consistently stood by Iran because Iran supported sanctions against the apartheid state. So that's pretty much carried on into the democratic era, and that has also translated into South Africa officially standing with Iran in most UN matters, or shielding Iran, or abstaining on certain votes to a certain degree when it talks about humanitarianism. And with Iran's crackdown on public dissent, it's been, again, unprecedented in the sense that the unofficial tallies claim that tens of thousands of people died in Iran before these later strikes, and the ANC-led foreign policy didn't really speak an awful lot to that. And now we've got the president saying, hey, he'd be keen to facilitate talks. I mean, nothing really new from the ANC, right?
And nothing new likely to come. I think if the ANC and South Africa then did not cut loose Iran after the massacre of protesters, then it's not going to change its stance based on a mere war. It is astonishing to me, and I keep watching in astonishment as South Africa continues on this path when the Iranian regime is quite clearly toxic. Whether or not you agree with an Israeli invasion, whether or not you think it should have the right to at least peaceful nuclear development, Iran has proven itself to be the kind of administration that you cannot do business with, that you cannot associate yourself with, yet the ANC is happy to do so. So I don't think just because, it's being bombed at the moment, we'll see a change in stance on that, which may or may not be important on the broader political front at the moment. I promise you that Europe and America are not paying a lot of attention to South Africa right now. They have bigger fish to fry, and they've got, kind of like concerns within their association within NATO at the same time.
Yeah.
But eventually, when things quieten down, questions will be asked: who is friend and who is foe? I, for one, would not like to be associated with Iran when that time comes.
Yeah, because not so long ago, and I said this at the beginning of our discussion, I mean, we had Iranian warships just off the False Bay coastline, and of course there's been a big hullabaloo about that. Apparently, according to the presidency, Cyril Ramaphosa didn't want the ships here for the BRICS war games. They ended up taking part in any case, and of course there was this board of inquiry set up to investigate whether or not his call may have been ignored. I can't help but wonder, given the US's sort of insanely accurate surveillance measures, that surely it was monitoring what was happening off our shores in Cape Town.
I don't think the Americans really care, to be honest with you. There's kind of, you can debate for hours about whether South Africa wanted the Iranians to take part or not, and who listened to who. That is an internal matter which doesn't signal outside at all. What the Americans care about is the fact that there were joint operations between Iran and South Africa, and that Iran was welcomed into South African territorial waters. That means, to their minds, that Iran and South Africa are allies. No amount of sophistry will change that. No amount of internal investigations and, objections will change that. There is obviously an allyship between South Africa and Iran, and that is how South Africa will be treated in this context. Changing that will require not simply saying, well, we'd love to see peace, but we still support the ordinary people of Iran, or talking about the fact that the war is illegal. All of that notwithstanding, South Africa is seen as an ally of Iran, and it will have to cut loose Iran in order to change that perspective.
Yeah, let's end off here, Philip, to let you go. There's been obviously quite a few South African travellers and South African green ID book holders that live in the UAE that have had to cower for, the sight and sounds of overflying jets and explosions and drones and whatever the case. And the skies have been chaotic. It's been an absolute mess. I would not have liked to have been somebody living in Europe who had been trying to sort of travel via Dubai to come back home to South Africa. It must have been, crazy, pulling out your hair, because at the same time there's been this criticism for our Pretoria International Relations Ministry, or DIRCO for short, that there's just not been enough assistance or willingness early on to assist South Africans perhaps potentially stranded overseas.
I don't think that criticism is fair just for this once. No one was really prepared for this eventuality. And you're seeing, rich, well-organized European nations struggling with exactly the same problem. Anyone who has a significant number of people in that region, which includes South Africa, is in trouble right now, and it is very much best efforts. Also, you don't know exactly where it's going, so do you require a full evacuation right now? I would be hard-pressed to make that call myself. So I think DIRCO's efforts to date may not have been enough, but then no one else has done much better either.
Philip, what are we missing here? Is this World War III and the early starts of that, or must we just chill and see what happens?
The Middle East has always been the flashpoint that as long as I've been alive, we've been watching the Middle East as a potential flashpoint that goes well beyond. And at the moment, it is going well beyond. The impact on oil and gas prices is already affecting the entire world. And to that, I guess you can call it a world-affecting war already. The point about the Middle East is it is highly volatile. It is very complicated, and we just don't know what comes next, which is why historically you did not poke that hornet's nest. You did not go and seek out trouble in the Middle East. The US is now broken with that policy, so now the future is unpredictable, and we just don't know.
And that's Phillip de Wet, our, I would say, senior global correspondent. He's always within arm's reach right here on the lead on News 24, offering us some solace and some reckoning in the global pursuit of news these days. I really do appreciate it, Phillip. Enjoy that train ride to London. I hope it's not affected like the skies above us.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Trending topic.
In our trending topic for today, a Somerset West sting operation has cracked an attempted corruption case here in Cape Town. Just this week, undercover police officers and the city's municipal manager, Lungelo Mbandazayo, acting as an official agent, sat casually at the Waterstone Village Centre waiting for a 51-year-old man to arrive. Now, this suspect, a city contractor tasked with maintaining municipal infrastructure, had, upon meeting Lungelo, tried to bribe him, as it's understood, with 1.4 million rand in hard cash. All for the promise of halting internal council investigations into the very same thing this suspect now stands accused of, bribery and corruption. News 24's Valani Ludidi reports that officers rushed in, cuffed the suspect and held him at Bellville police station. This wasn't the first controlled sting operation with this target, this company director, where the seeds of false trust among this pair were first laid on the other side of the metro at a meeting in Table Bay Mall. Mayor Jordan Hill-Lewis has applauded Mbandazayo for his bravery, whilst the suspect was set to face the magistrate on corruption charges. It must be said, It'd be great to see this similar sort of thing across all of our country's major metros. What say you? Drop us a comment below.
Looking for a smarter weekend scroll? The Weekender is your ultimate guide to bold stories, sharp opinion, and a fresh lens on life in Mzansi. From exclusive interviews and powerful essays to wine picks, playlists, and pop culture gems, it's your perfect weekend read all in one place, landing every Saturday on News 24. And finally,
it's our regular segment on this day in history, and on the 4th of March 1970, then apartheid-era Water Affairs Minister S.P. Botha announced new dam and transfer schemes for the province, including the Voelvlei Dam and the Riviersonderend Bergrivier project to safeguard the Western Cape's water supply. And he cautioned that many more supplementary schemes would have to be brought on board before the end of the century to store and use water more efficiently. While his warning rang true, by 2010, Beaufort West's Gamke Dam ran dry during a crippling drought, forcing that town to recycle treated sewage water and rely on tankered supplies. And just a few years later, you know about this, the 2017 Cape Town Day Zero crisis brought this province to the brink of running out of municipal water. Really shows you we've had water scarcity and provision problems for the longest time. And lastly, time now for Roby's Pointless Bribe Quiz, and we asked you the following. Former Cope co-founder and leader Maceo Locortes died. How old was he at the time? The answer is 77. A former Robben Islander and UDF organizer, many of his colleagues will remember him for being extremely unpretentious. And that's this reporter's general sort of experience with Maceo, getting his sound bites on the sidelines of Parliament. He was always very, very nice to all the journalists around him, and his keen political mind will definitely be missed on the South African political stage. May his soul rest in peace. I've got some excellent news. From this March onwards, the Lead will be introducing Newsmaker Thursdays, where I'll be interviewing some of South Africa's biggest names. Look out for this. We've got our first confirmed guest this Thursday. You're not going to want to miss this conversation. The show comes out at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts. Stay tuned. It's going to be a humdinger. My name's Graeme Robbenheimer, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll always have the Lead.